I'm gonna get started here. Just need to do one thing real quick. So just give me a moment. I'll be right with you. Okay, all right. All right, a great start. But look, I search for things all the time. And maybe you do too, and maybe that's why you're here. And we're gonna talk today, not only about what sort of things we search for, we're also going to talk about how to search for them. But what I want you to think about as we're going through this presentation is why you search for the things you search for. Because I think if you think about why, it can help narrow down the search criteria you take and will help you get a faster resolution. My name is Kevin Murphy. I'm really thankful that you're here today. I work at a company called BookBub. We provide ebook recommendations. We also have an audiobook marketplace, and we're hiring. So if you'd like to hear more about that, come find me later. And I'm here today to introduce to you a brand new search engine. I perform searches so often that I decided it was unfair to use other people's search engines, and I wrote my own. So today I'm here to talk to you about Alluvial Deposit. It's unique from a couple search engines in a few particular ways. The first is if you search for Kevin Murphy, it's the only search engine where you'll actually find information about me. No other search engine can do that. The second is that Alluvial doesn't provide you page after page of results. It only gives you 3 results. If you can't find your answer in 3, you never needed to know it anyway. Don't worry about it. And the last thing that Alluvial does is it keeps track of your search history. So now across device, across browser, you have access to every search you've performed while using Alluvial. And we're going to be iterating on this feature throughout this presentation today. The first thing we're going to be doing is adding timestamps so that you know when you searched for that thing that you were searching for, okay? And we have this concept of timestamping different parts of the application in a couple different areas. So we're gonna use GitHub's View Component library to help manage the presentation of this for us. We're gonna start with a test. We're gonna have some time that we want to provide a timestamp for. We'll render our component and we'll make sure that the date and time show up in our component formatted the way that we expect it to, given the design specifications. Okay. So now in our view, we're going to use Rails's localize helper, the L method, to help format this timestamp as a string in the way that we expect it to. And the way that works is you can define formats in your locales file and then tell it how to format that date. So we're going to go to our locales file. We'll define those keys for those formats that we specified. And at this point, I'm kind of stuck. My test fails because I didn't want it to be the empty string. I wanted it to be the actual date or time, but I don't know what characters to put into that locales file to make it look that way. What I do know is that if I search for Ruby strift time, I'll come across the documentation, I'll pull that up, and there's a big table with all the directives that will tell me the characters I need to put in to format the date the way I want to. So now I can look at this documentation, go back to my locales file, fill it in with the somewhat cryptic, esoteric characters that I don't have memorized, and just trust me, now my test passes. And the way I was able to accomplish that was by searching for that information. I don't have all of those directives memorized, but what I do have memorized is that if I search for Ruby strift time, I'll know how to get it. Right? I've left myself a pointer in my brain, so I'm not starting from scratch every time. I've memorized Ruby strift time, so I don't have to memorize all of those characters, and instead I can save my brain space for really important things, like all the lyrics to every song I ever heard in middle school, things that I need to know for the rest of my time. And now look, I may not have searched for this from a search engine. I may have used my bookmarking tool. I may have used the way that I keep my notes to keep track of this, but if I want to recall this in the future, I'm probably going to need some keywords to remember to pick this up over time. And for me, for pulling up these directives, that means Ruby strift time. I just know that's where I can get it. Let's continue to iterate on our component a little bit. We'll make it look a little nicer. We've got these fancy icons now. It's all on one line as opposed to 2 lines. And we're also going to make a functional change. Right now, our component doesn't play very nicely if we pass it nil, but we want it to because sometimes the timestamps we're passing to it don't exist. What we'd rather it do is it provide some placeholder text. Just tell us, we don't know, because that's better than just blowing up. And luckily, in our application, we have an existing Rails helper we're using elsewhere that we've defined that does exactly this. It basically wraps the L method for us to make sure that we have a timestamp and then calls the L method. Otherwise, it provides the placeholder text that's passed in. So we want to update our existing view component to use this existing Rails helper. And so we're going ahead and do that. That should be a real simple fix. Rather than calling the L method, we'll instead call L datetime, and we should be all done. And just to make sure, we're going to run our tests, but and it doesn't work. And we don't know why, because we're already using both of these individual things in different places and they're working, but we don't know why the confluence of them is now causing us a problem. And I'm inclined to copy and paste this error message wholesale and just put it in my search engine. And that's a great strategy. I do recommend it. It's a high leverage strategy. It works a lot of the time. Right? It's very unlikely that you're the only person to have ever encountered this issue before, and other people may have written about it on the internet. It's a great choice. I'm not going to do that here for a couple different reasons. We'll talk about that right now. The first is the exception that's raised is no method error, which is part of Ruby standard library and a pretty generic error message. I know I've had the pleasure of raising it a time or two in my career, and maybe you have as well. The next time you raise no method error, I hope you think fondly upon this presentation. But it happens a lot, and it's very generic. So it's unlikely that I'm going to find results that are tailored to the problem I'm trying to solve right now. On the flip side, everything else in this error message is incredibly specific to my application. The LDateTime method is defined in the source code of my app. The datetime component that's trying to call this method that it's not finding is defined in my application. So if I copy and paste this whole thing and search for it, I might get some results, but it's very unlikely it's going to be about my problem, because that would be really miraculous that someone has the exact same setup. So I need to do something else here. And I know the issue is that I'm trying to integrate a Rails helper into view component. So I'm going to pull up the README for view component. And here it is in its entirety. It's very terse, not going to help me. Except it does, because it does have a link to a separate site for documentation. So I go there, and that documentation is extensive and wonderful and beautiful. Are there any people in the audience today who have contributed to view component? Anybody? Okay. If you see someone at the conference today who has contributed to view component, thank them for me, because this documentation is stellar, and I'm incredibly helpful and thankful that it's here today. And most relevant for this conversation, the great thing about this documentation is that it has a search box. This is a talk about searching, so we're going to type some characters in that search box. And we're looking to see how to use a Rails helper. So we're just going to type in helper, and it turns out there's a whole page on helpers that has a couple of ways that we can access helpers from our view component. So we read through that, and we're going to use this helpers proxy that it proposes. So we'll go back to our view component here, and rather than calling LDateTime, what we're going to do instead is call helpers.LDateTime. And now our test passes. And it was thanks to searching. I would have never guessed, oh, we'll just preface it with helpers.LDateTime and it will work, right? I need to find the information out from the documentation. Let's build a separate feature to our search history here. We're going to add comments, because why not? Everything needs comments. You can now comment on your search history. You can remember why you searched for something, maybe some great results that you found, things that you liked or didn't like about it, whatever you want to do. So we're building this feature out locally. We're testing it for the first time. We started typing a comment in our comment box. We hit the create button, and this is what happens. Absolutely nothing. It just sits there. We get no feedback. We don't know if it worked. We don't know if there was an error. We have no feedback whatsoever. So we got to figure that out. We start by looking at the logs. We see that we did issue a request to hit the controller to make a comment. We look in the database. We did persist a comment, so it worked. And now it's trying to redirect to this other place, and it looks like that's there. But it's not showing up. Nothing's happening. And now this is a Rails 7 application, and that uses Hotwire by default. You can see that's processing these requests as a turbo stream. That's part of Hotwire. And we're familiar with Rails, but we're not super familiar with Hotwire, so we're willing to bet that we did something wrong with Hotwire because we haven't used it before. So I'm going to do what I wanted to do with our no method error, and I'm going to copy and paste some information out of this log message and search for it. I'm going to look for how to process a show as a turbo stream, because it looks like that's what didn't happen. Notice I got rid of the name of the controller in my search because that's specific to my application, so it's unlikely to be helpful as added search information. And even after searching for this, I don't get any good information about how to solve my problem. So I start to think that maybe my show page just doesn't work. So I go into my browser, I type /query/17, I hit enter, and it does render. It works, it's working. So we can see on the top our TurboStream request that didn't work, on the bottom our HTML request that did work, and now I'm playing a game of spot the difference. And I notice that the HTML request has an additional line where it's rendering a layout, and the Turbo request is not doing that. So I start to think maybe my problem is that Turbo's not rendering the layout. So okay, I can search for that, right? I don't find anything helpful there. Let's be a little more positive. How can Turbo render a layout? Also nothing there. And so now I do what I did for View Component, and I look at the Turbo Rails library. This time I'm looking at the issues list, both open and closed, trying to see if anyone else did something similar to me, and I'm striking out there as well. And I take a step back and I remember this is a Rails 7 application. It uses Hotwire by default. I'm familiar with Rails, but not as familiar with Hotwire. Maybe there are other people who are also familiar with Rails, not as familiar with Hotwire, having the same problem. So I'm gonna look at a Rails-specific location. I go to the discussion forum. I'm still not finding anything. Nothing's coming. And at this point, I'm getting frustrated. I'm getting mad. I'm upset. I'm having an existential crisis, right? I'm wondering if I should even still be a developer. I'm trying to do something that I've done dozens of times in my career. All I want to do is hit an endpoint, make a thing, and go to a different page. And now I can't do that anymore, so apparently the world's passed me by, and I should buy a farm somewhere. And when I realize what I need to do, the most important thing I can do to help solve this problem is to stop trying to fix it. Because I'm spiraling, nothing's working. So I need to step away. And what I'd like to tell you that I did was that I went off and did some exercise, or I read a book for pleasure, or I picked up a hobby to put myself in a different frame of mind. But what I really did is I ate a bowl of ice cream. Because I'm an adult, and I can eat ice cream whenever I want. And so I had my bowl of ice cream, and I came back to my computer, I sat down, I looked up my search history on Alluvial to help remind me of the things that I had looked for, trying to figure out if I missed something. And I'm still no closer to solving my problem after taking that break. So I need to do something else. What I decide to do is tell the world that I can't figure this out, and hope that someone out there in the universe takes pity on me and helps me out. I'm very thankful that I have knowledgeable and helpful friends, and so my buddy Connor reaches out and very clearly and quickly points out the error of my ways, which we'll describe now. See, the issue of what I was doing is I was asking Turbo to render my show.erb file. And if you're not as familiar with Hotwire, just like me, Hotwire will process HTML over the wire. What I was asking Hotwire to do is process ERB over the wire. And that's not what Hotwire does. It's not EOTwire. That's a less fun name. It's Hotwire. So the issue was I had broken the convention of the name of the file. I shouldn't have been asking it to process and render show.erb, but instead the HTML variant, show.html.erb. I never looked at the name of the file. Why would you look at the name of the file? I was furiously looking through code. I was looking through tutorials. I was looking through examples. I was searching all over the internet. Nothing was coming to me. This would have been really hard, if not impossible, to ever find the answer for by searching for something. It was only by getting a different perspective that someone else was able to walk in, whether it be myself or my own fresh eyes, and figure out what was going on here. So when you're using search to solve direct problems, again, I very highly recommend copy the exact issue, see if anyone else has had the same problem. It's a high leverage solution, and if it doesn't work, you can quickly move on to other things. Also consider situations where you don't have to start with consuming the entirety of the internet to get to your answer. Right? Start the view component documentation as opposed to saying, hey, anyone, does anywhere know where I can find this information? And when you're having a particularly difficult problem troubleshooting something, recognize when you need to stop and do something else. Remember that you're not doing this alone, even if this is your side project, even if you're the only developer assigned to this work, even if you're the only person at the company. It doesn't matter. There are still folks that can help you. Please let them. So now, thanks to my friend Connor, we have search history comments working, and people are commenting all the time on their search history. I don't know why, but they love it. People are commenting left and right over everything. They're commenting so much that it's becoming problematic to load the search history page. So we have ourselves a performance issue. And so we pull up Rack Mini Profiler, and it looks like we're executing a database query per comment that we're looking to render on the view. So it seems we've got ourselves an n+1 query problem, and that's okay. We know how to fix that. We go to our controller where we're loading up our search history, and we also ask it to include the associated comments. So now, rather than issuing one database query per comment we want to render on the view, we're issuing one query to load up all of the comments. And we've solved our performance issue without doing a single search. Good job, everybody. But we're not satisfied with that result. You see, we had to get told about this n+1 problem from our monitoring tool, or even worse, from user feedback complaining about it. And we know we can be a little more proactive about it. We know we've used a tool called Bullet that can preemptively tell us about potential n+1 query problems. So we go to add it to our gem file. But before we commit it, we take a second to wonder, is there a different way? I already know I can use Bullet to solve this problem, but can I do something else? What else is there in the world of n+1 detection that might be beneficial for this purpose? And by doing this, by taking a few minutes, I become introduced to the n+1 control gem. And I read this great blog post from Evil Martians that describes the intent and how it works and how it's similar and different and how to use it. And I look at the repo, I scroll down to the README that also is populated with great information about how to use it and how it works and what you need to do to get started. I scroll back up to the top. I'm looking at when the latest commit was just to get some general recency information. I'm looking at the issues, both open and closed, to see how they were communicated, how they were handled, what the sort of governance structure is of the project. Same thing for open and closed pull requests. I might look at stars or the number of downloads on Ruby gems to get some sense of like social proof that people are really using this thing. And so now all I need to do is figure out if I'm going to use this thing. And I'm not going to tell you that because that would take me about 30 minutes to do so. I did it before. If you want to, you can find it out there. But what I want you to take from this is only by searching for something that I already knew how to do, I became introduced to a new way of solving the same problem in a different way. I didn't just take it for granted that I know what to do here. I understood there might be different approaches that I could take. And now when I'm choosing between n+1 control and Bullet, I may still choose to use Bullet, but I'm not making that choice simply because it's the way I know how to do it. I'm making an informed, intentional choice based on the criteria that I've learned from taking that couple of minutes to seek out other implementations. We have one last feature we're going to work on today. I've been talking a lot about how wonderful the search history is at Alluvial, and it's great. But you know, there are times when you just don't want your search history sitting on a server somewhere. So we're going to add a button that a user can click, and the search history goes away. But we're not going to build that here today. Someone else already did that for us. We're going to review the code that they've submitted to get merged. We see that they're using the delete all method to get rid of the search history, and that's a fine choice. But we have one particular concern about using that specific method, and it has to do with the comments that we added. We want to make sure that those associated records are deleted. So off the top of our head, we go write this manifesto about, hey, this is great, but what if we did this other thing, and we can hit the add comment button and move on with our life, but we're not. First, we're going to search for a couple things. I know that calling delete all doesn't execute callbacks in Rails, but I'm going to find where in the documentation it says that. I'm going to pull that link and add that into my comment. I also propose that we may have to use destroy all as opposed to delete all. I'm going to look for some inspiration to explain the differences between those two and how they work and how they're similar and different. I find this great gist from Eileen, who we just heard from. She gave a great keynote just before this. I'm going to copy and paste that link and put it back into my comment. And I'm actually going to correct the first search that I did. I looked for it delete all, not executing callbacks. But what I really want to talk about are the delete options, which are like a subtle difference. So I'm going to look for the dependent options in Rails' source documentation to pull that. And when I do that, I get introduced to a blog post that tells me in Rails 6.1 there was a new dependent option added called destroy async. And that will trigger a background job to delete associated records as opposed to doing it in band in the current request. So that's fun. That's a new thing. I hadn't heard about that before. So instantly I want to use this shiny new thing to solve all the world's problems. But I also feel that it's very relevant to this current conversation. We might be able to use that here. So I'm going to take that and actually rewrite the second paragraph of my comment and introduce that as a thing that we should maybe talk about a little more. And I've read one blog post on it, so I'm an expert. So we should use this thing. It seems cool. But I'm going to include the link to where to find information about that because I want people to have some context of where I heard about it. So I searched for a bunch of stuff that I already knew about. And the reason for that is for a couple of different purposes. First, I want to provide details of where you can find the information that I'm asserting as true, so you don't have to just believe me and take my word for it. And also, so I don't have to break up my brilliant and wonderful prose with these technical concepts. You can find it later. Secondly, I proposed a different solution to take, and I want to provide a lot more information about how those things are similar or different, or how to use them. Right? And lastly, I was searching for something else, and I just found something that I didn't know about before. And now I may be the last person that knows about the destroy async option. I'm willing to bet no, but even if that's true, I want everyone to know that, hey, I just became introduced to this thing. This is all the context that I know about it. Let's have a nice discussion about it. Can you fill in more details for me? Because that may be a poor choice, maybe not, but I just want to learn more about it, and why not hijack this pull request to find out some more information about it from others. So when I started this talk, I asked you to think about why we search for the things that we search for. And for me, there are 4 big buckets of information. Firstly, if I have no clue how to do something, I need to seek wisdom and expertise from others who know how to do so. Right? Give me some frame of reference for how to start. I may have done it before, but I don't know exactly what the particulars are. And so I'm going to do a search to get that information, but I'm not starting from scratch, right? I know to search for Ruby strift time to get the formatting directives. I just don't have them all memorized. I also search for stuff that I already know how to do, right? Because there might be a different way. This is how I get introduced to new tools, new design patterns, new paradigms, new ways of thinking, ways that people do this in other languages and frameworks that may be applicable to my situation, but I didn't just know about before. Particularly in our industry where things are constantly changing, this could be helpful to take a few minutes just to become aware of what these things are. It doesn't mean chasing the new hotness and always doing what's the latest thing out there, but just having some understanding and appreciation for what you can do. You might not use it now, but 6 months from now, you might be thinking, what was that thing I searched for a while ago that was related to this? That this might actually be applicable now. And you've saved yourself some time in the future. And lastly, I search for things that I already know so I can tell others about them. So they don't have to take my word for it. And also so that they can have it and preserve it in whatever context is important for them. So it lives outside of the scope of a conversation with me. They can bookmark it. They can put it in their notes tool. They can share it with others in a more easy to manage way. And also to give folks the credit of where I found about this information. Because I didn't just make all this stuff up. Other people put a lot of hard work into sharing it. And that's how I found out about it. So I want others to know about the great work that they did. If you yourself are searching for a copy of these slides, want to know how to contact me, or like a narrative description about why I think we search, you can do so at kevinjmurphy.com/browserhistory. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to talk about them afterwards individually. I'll stand right over here for a few minutes, or come find me in the hallway. If you do want to say hi, but don't have a question or don't really know what to say, just think about something you solved at work recently by searching for it, and we can just talk about that, and then it's a little less awkward. We already have the context of what we're going to chat about. It's cool. It's fine. And the next time you are searching for something, I hope you take a second or two to think about why you're searching for that and develop a strategy of how you're going to look for it. Because I think taking those few seconds can help inform your decision that will help you come to a conclusion more quickly. And ultimately, of course, I hope that you find what you're looking for. Thank you all.